Kwaba, welcome to this week's edition of Africa in Focus with myself, Kwame, Ghanaian writer, broadcaster, journalist, podcaster, and entrepreneur. And in this week's edition of Africa in Focus is a special Why the White Man, or the West, but I use the term the white man, wants to kill Ibrahim Traore. All right, so that's the theme for this week's show. Why the West, or the white man, wants to kill Ibrahim Traore. So before we start, if you like what you hear, please share it to your friends, family, social media networks, subscribe to Ghana African Focus on YouTube. We want to get at least 100 subscribers by the end of the year. So please subscribe to the Ghana African Focus on YouTube. Hit the notification bell, meaning that every time I upload a new podcast, YouTube will notify you of this. Also, follow me on Spotify. Look out for Ghana African Focus on Spotify and click follow, meaning that every time we upload a new podcast on Spotify, Spotify will notify you of that. So you've got nearly 600 to follow on Spotify. We want to get to 1,000 by the end of the year. So please subscribe, tell your friends, tell your family about Ghana Africa in Focus. All right, so you may not be aware, but this week, or Wednesday to be exact, Wednesday, April 30th, was a global day of protest in favor of Ibrahim Traoré, who have now become a target for Western or white imperialists. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know who Ibrahim Traoré is, he is the leader of Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is a country in West Africa, north of Ghana, and is a predominantly Muslim country. And Burkina Faso is a remnant of the former Mossi Empire, okay? That was in the Middle Ages. And Ibrahim, famous Burkinabés include Thomas Sankara, who was a fantastic leader, who between 1983 and 1997. And Ibrahim Traoré is a disciple of Thomas Sankara. Thomas Sankara did a lot of work in the 4 years he was head of Burkina Faso, and that got up news to the French. But what Thomas Sankara did, amongst other things, was to elevate women to high office. He also invested a lot in agriculture, and he also wanted the country to own its wealth, all right, as opposed to the French owning the wealth. So this is why, Thomas Sankara was taken out by his close friend, Blaise Compaoré. And I come on to assassinations of African leaders as part of this podcast evolves. So Ibrahim Traoré came to power in a coup September 2022. And since that time, he has revolutionized the country. And I'll tell you what he's done, again, as the podcast evolves. So the question we must ask is, why does the white man or the West want to literally kill Ibrahim Traoré? And on that, there's been 20 assassination attempts already on Ibrahim Traoré's life over the last nearly 3 years. Yeah? So it shows you that the white man, yeah, is the enemy of African progress, African emancipation. So before I even go there, let's rewind and tell you why Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso, along with Niger, along with Mali, and to a degree Senegal, why they have had those uprisings. I call them uprisings, not coups. Why they've had those uprisings that has led to, apart from Senegal, military so-called rulership. Yeah. So if you are aware, a couple of years ago, I did a podcast on why the French must leave Africa. Because the French have done a lot of wicked to Africa and done a lot of bad to Africa since, from slavery right down to colonialism, right down to neocolonialism. In actual fact, as part of your research, listeners, you can get a book by former British MI5 agent Frederick Forsyth called Dogs of War. Now, it's a fictional book, which is a bit of reality, but it shows you how the French, plan coups and destabilize countries where the leader is not playing ball. Okay, so that novel you can get, Frederick Forsyth, Dogs of War. I think it's also on YouTube as well, so look out for that. And you can see for yourself the wicked machinations of the French state. In actual fact, France needs Africa. Like I said in that podcast, Jacques Chirac, the former president of France, said that without Africa, France would slide to the realm of a third world country. Francois Mitterrand, as early as 1956, which is 2 years before the French, Francophone agreement, said that without Africa, France has no future. I want to say that again. Francois Mitterrand, French president between 1981 and 1995, said 3 years before the French Colonial Agreement was signed that without Africa, France has no future in the 21st century. Check it. So this is why France is important to Africa, or rather, Africa is important to France, because contrary to what you may believe or think, Africa does not need France, but it is France that needs Africa. So in that podcast, I said, why French must leave Africa, right? I focus your attention on that wicked France colonial agreement that was hashed up by Charles de Gaulle in 1958, because the winds of change was sweeping across Africa, with the likes of Kwame Nkrumah gaining independence for Ghana in 1957, and other countries beginning to, shackle the yoke of, you could say, political Western imperialism. Now, one of the key things in that French colonial agreement, right, which is why Burkina Faso under Ibrahim Traoré staged the uprising, and more importantly, left the Francophone agreement, is that under the Francophone agreement, France owns all the resources. So country like Burkina, which is very fertile in agricultural products, which has a lot of gold, which has a lot of oil, France owns that under this colonial agreement. Again, under the colonial agreement, France takes 95% of the wealth of that country back to Paris, in the treasury in Paris. Again, under the wicked colonial agreement, France, borrows money that they've stolen to these African countries. So, for example, Burkina Faso, France borrowed money to Burkina Faso at exorbitant interest rates that Burkina Faso will have to pay back. Again, and the final part of this agreement, but I'll probably leave it in the footnote so you can read it for yourself more deeply, is that France has first refusal on contracts. So basically, if Burkina Faso wanted to build a road from, let's say, from Ouagadougou, the capital, to a port city, right, that a French firm would have the first say on that contract. They will have the first tender to that contract. But if it went to another country, if the French didn't think it was for them. So that's showing you the nuances, the wicked nuances of that French colonial agreement. Essentially, making these colonies, like Burkina Faso, like Mali, like Senegal, like Cameroon, like Cote d'Ivoire, basically slaves. It's slavery in different guise. And so, seeing this, and seeing how much the French, since 1958, all the 4 years of Sankara, how much the French had stolen, looted from Burkina Faso, is why Ibrahim Traoré inspired the uprising in 2022 September. Prior to that, a lot of the African youth in Burkina Faso, but also generally in so-called Francophone Africa, were waking up. Yeah, they were seeing firsthand the machinations of that wicked, evil French Colonial Agreement. Yeah, that basically made them slaves in their own country. And there was a very, very popular Francophone artist. I think his name was Papa Wemba. He was very vocal through his music about the French involvement in Africa, particularly that colonial agreement. So given all this backdrop is what made the uprising of Ibrahim Traoré possible, alongside Niger and Mali. So this is what led to the uprising in September 22 that brought in Ibrahim Traoré. Yeah? And so what he's done, and this is why, you know, there've been 20 attempts in his life, is basically to get out of that Francophone agreement, that France does not own Burkina's resources, that France cannot have first say on any contract, that 95% of Burkina's wealth is not going to France, but staying in Burkina, and that Burkina has a right to be a sovereign, in the true sense of the word, independent nation, not a colony of France. Yeah? As well as Ibrahim Traoré, like I've told you before, has invested heavily in our culture, because one of the key fundamentals of nation development, yeah, or building a nation, is that nation's ability to feed itself. So if a nation cannot feed itself, that nation will die, and that nation will become a pawn in other games. As you see, you know, in the Israeli-Palestine conflict, Israel has used food as a weapon against the Palestinians, yeah, not allowing food to go into Palestine, which is why you got a lot of, you know, possibly starvation, malnutrition in Gaza or the West Bank as a result of, you know, the recent Israeli blockade of Gaza. And so food can be used as a weapon against vulnerable countries. So this is why Ibrahim Traoré has invested heavily in our culture. Secondly, thing that he's done is taking back ownership of the gold and other mineral resources back into the hands of Burkina Faso. So under that French agreement, it was all owned by France. Ibrahim Traoré has taken that away from the French. He's also renegotiated a lot of the contracts that were signed by previous governments under the French Colonial Agreement, because those contracts that were signed did not favor Burkina Faso, it favored the French. So Ibrahim Traoré reviewed that, making his contract now in favor of Burkina Faso. Again, he's nationalized the gold. So now the gold firmly belongs to Burkina Faso. Yeah. And apparently, you know, either by the end of this year or next year, Burkina Faso will complete its newly refined gold factory, whereby it will refine the gold in its own country rather than being used as a raw material, and then the gold going out of Burkina and being refined in Paris or London or Amsterdam or Tel Aviv, and then coming back to Burkina as finished goods. Ibrahim Traoré has nipped all that in the bud and is now in the process of nearly building a gold refinery whereby all the gold mined in Burkina Faso can be refined in Burkina Faso as finished goods. So because he's doing this, yeah, and he's not corrupt, he's not greedy, because the people have seen the change for themselves. The people of Burkina have seen the change for themselves. And so because, you know, Ibrahim Traoré has not put the money in the bank, a Swiss bank account or bank account in London or New York or Zurich, right? Because Ibrahim Traoré is not corrupt, because Ibrahim Traoré does not use money to buy such cars, because Ibrahim Traoré is doing what the people want, i.e. to make the country a more sovereign state, a more independent state, yeah? and it's giving back the wealth to the people, it's giving back the resources of the country to the people, and not greedy multinationals, he's now become, you know, non-persona grata to French. In terms of France, right, it's not just France, it's the West, because the white man sticks together. So we see now recently, the US have put a communique out that accuses Ibrahim Traoré of using the gold to enrich himself and his families and crony, which is a lie. But you see, this is a propaganda that they're using now, yeah, that he's corrupt, he's using the gold for himself, he's he's doing this, he's doing that, his cronies are lucky that are milking the country while the people suffer. This is a sort of propaganda that they're wanting to use as justification to get rid of him. Wasn't the same propaganda the West used about Gaddafi? Gaddafi killing his own people in Libya when he wasn't? Because under Gaddafi, Libya had no debt. Under Gaddafi, every Libyan had a house or an apartment. Under Gaddafi, every Libyan had free healthcare. Under Gaddafi, every Libyan had free education. Under Gaddafi, if you were a newlywed couple, right, you would get a house and get $50,000 to start your life. And is this a way called dictator? But because the West knew that Gaddafi wanted the United States of Africa and was in the process of using the gold reserves of Libya to finance a single African currency, meaning that all raw materials in Africa will now be priced in gold dinars, literally gold, and the West didn't have that much gold. This is why they had to get rid of Gaddafi. Not because he was a dictator, not because he was killing his own people, but because he was instrumental, yeah, in the reawakening or the reconversion of the African single currency, of the African free trade area, and also of the African Central Bank that Kwame Nkrumah had envisaged 60 years ago. So this is why Gaddafi was eliminated. So we now see the same propaganda, same tactics that they used then, they're using now against Ibrahim Traoré. But before I go any further, it's important to understand that this very same white man who was attempted to kill Ibrahim Traoré not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, but 20 times, is the same white man who killed Lumumba, yeah? Because the US president at the time, Dwight Eisenhower, he gave the orders, right, for Patrice Lumumba in DR Congo to be killed. Yeah? Again, the same Western or the white man that was involved in the coup that got rid of Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, 1966. Yeah, and the CIA declassified documents that prove that that coup in Ghana on February 24th, 1966, was hatched in Washington by the CIA, withheld by Israeli Mossad, French intelligence, and MI6 from Britain. This is the same white man, yeah, Western people, that got rid of Thomas Sankara by using his friend Blaise Compaoré, his close friend Blaise Compaoré killed Thomas Sankara. Yeah, this is the same white man that killed Malcolm X, that infiltrated the Nation of Islam, yeah, and put plants in there, which ended up killing Malcolm X. These are the same Western agencies or the same white man that killed MLK, Martin Luther King. Yeah? So the white man or the West has got a track record in removing African leaders or black leaders that they deem a threat. Because back in the day, Patrice Lumumba was deemed a threat because he wanted to nationalize the mines of DR Congo and give the world back to people. Malcolm X, back in the day, was deemed a threat because he was beginning to wake up African Americans from their slumber and make them proud to be African. Martin Luther King became a threat to America and the white man because, again, he was waking up the conscientized mind of the Africans in America. Again, Kwame Nkrumah became a threat to the white man because of his Pan-African stance and his drive for United States of Africa, which will become a threat to the West. This is why Nkrumah got taken out. So what I'm saying is that African total emancipation is against Western imperialism. And on another foot, Western imperialism is anti-African emancipation. Hope you understand that. Because our liberation, our freedom from total Western dominance, right, is our emancipation. But they will not allow that because Africa is where they eat from. The African table is where they eat from. That is why they carved up Africa in the Congress of Berlin in 1884, 1885, like a pizza, so that each of the Western powers could have their part of that African real estate. Because they know back then, as they do now, that Africa has all the mineral resources that the West needs, that the white man needs for their way of life, their quality of life, and more importantly, their industrial complex. Particularly this move for AI, artificial intelligence, right? A lot of the raw materials used to make AI come from Africa. If you look at, a lot of the high-tech stuff, like smartphones, like smart TVs, like smart computers, like these new electric cars, all need material that come out of Africa, specifically DR Congo. Yeah. So you have to understand, listeners, that Africa has all the resources that the white man needs for their industrial complex and essentially their survival. Because without African raw materials, the West is nothing. And same too for India and China and Russia and whatever. All these geopolitical entities, they need African resources, right, to be on top of the world order. Yeah, because right now we are in a new world order. And Africa is the final frontier. So when you got a leader like Ibrahim Traore and the others in Mali, Senegal, and Niger that are going against Western imperialism, that poses a direct threat to Western interests. So this is why Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traore, who has become vocal, unlike Mali and Niger, who are not as vocal, but they are still doing their thing. That's why he's become a threat. Because Ibrahim Traore now represents Kwame Nkrumah. So back 60 years ago, when Kwame Nkrumah was fighting for Ghana independence, but not just for fighting for Ghana independence, because he said, and I quote, "Ghana's independence is meaningless unless it is linked to the total liberation of Africa." So Nkrumah's drive was not just for Ghana, but for the whole African continent. And we see in Ibrahim Traore, Kwame Nkrumah 2.0. Because despite what is happening in Burkina, we still have a problem with Islamist insurgents, which are sponsored by Qatar and other proxy bodies to destabilize that region so that they can have the minerals free of charge. Yeah. Despite that, Ibrahim Traore is able to, put forward his Pan-African radical agenda in Burkina Faso. And so this poses a direct threat to the Western interests, and this is why they view Africans, and this is how they now operate. So back then, like in the case of Martin Luther King, and to a degree, Patrice Lumumba, they use white people to kill those leaders. But now, the white man and the West is smart. So what they're doing now, they are paying Africans, with blood money to go into Burkina Faso, cause chaos, cause mayhem, and end up killing Ibrahim Traore. Didn't we see that with Gaddafi? That it was local Libyans that ended up killing Gaddafi. Yeah, and those local Libyans were sponsored by the West, namely America and NATO. We're seeing a similar thing now because even one of the attempts on Ibn Traoré's life, apparently, one soldier or some soldiers were paid £5 million each to kill Traoré. And apparently, the soldier said to Traoré that we've been given £5 million to kill you. Yeah. But we didn't take, we just took the money, but we just took the money, but we did not kill you. And Ibrahim Traoré just says, take the money. Yeah. So that shows you why that the white man, this wicked, evil white man, who does not want Africans and Africa to progress, why, is hell-bent on destroying any semblance of African emancipation. Because like I said, our emancipation as Africans is their demise. And they cannot counter that. And they will do everything and anything in their power as they see it to ensure that Africa never rises. And so this man, Ibn Traoré, who is setting the example for other Africans to follow, yeah, is seen as a role model. So this is why they want to take him out. And this is why, on April 30th, when it's just gone, there was a global protest demonstration against the West, the white man who wanted to stabilize Burkina Faso by assassinating Ibrahim Traoré. So in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina itself, in Accra, Ghana, in Abuja, Nigeria, in Kingston, Jamaica, in London, England, in Paris, France, in Berlin, Germany, basically all over the world where African people are, right, there were protests against, the propaganda and the assassination attempts on Ibn Traoré's life. And it was great to see that millions upon millions of African people across the world are saying directly to the West, we will not allow you to kill Ibn Traoré like you did Muammar Gaddafi, Steve Biko, Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah. We will not tolerate it because today is New African, yeah? And we are wide awake. We know your games. Not all of us are asleep. We know what your games are to destabilize Africa and continue to make it hew of wood and draw of water. So this is why the global protest demonstration took place last Wednesday. And I was pleased to see that Africans across the world now are becoming of age. Yeah? And we send a message to the West, to the white man, that should you be successful, because for me personally, I believe the almighty, divine, supreme being, Trijampong, and the ancestors are guiding Ibrahim Traoré. But should you be successful in killing Traoré, there's many white people in Africa. If you kill Traoré, that is a declaration of war on African people. Yeah, and we have a right to defend ourselves by any means necessary. Yeah, and so as Africans, as people who are sick and tired of white dominance in our countries, of Western imperialism, because Western imperialism is alive, don't be fooled by this issue that African countries are independent because they got a flag and national anthem. No, Africa was never independent. African countries have been never independent. They are still under the yoke of white supremacy, Western domination. Yeah, and the time has come to wake up and to, warn the West that if you move Ibrahim Traoré, it's not business as usual. There'll be serious repercussions on your people living in Africa. And so in closing, African emancipation is total sovereignty, self-determination, and unreliance from white supremacy, white domination. Yeah. And Ibrahim Traore and what's happening in Mali, Niger, and Senegal is evidence of this reawakening of the African spirit that, we want to be free from Western imperialism and Western control. And that Western imperialism is an anathema and a threat to African sovereignty, African self-determination, and the ability of Africans to master and take charge of their own destinies. And so what we see, particularly with the Alliance of Sahelian States, again, another incrementalism in terms of the Casablanca group, is a determination to rid ourselves from Western imperialism and Western dominance. And that as Africans, our countries and our leaders, not the proper ones that you put in place, because while the West criticize Ibrahim Traore, why are you criticizing Equatorial Guinea, Theobald Obiang, who's been in power for 45 years? Why do you criticize the Iyadema dynasty in Togo that's been in power since 1964? Why do you criticize Paul Biya of Cameroon, who's been in power for nearly 40 years? Why do you criticize Yoweri Museveni of Uganda? Right, he's corrupt. He's more corrupt or more crooked than Ibrahim Traore. Why did you take him out? Even Paul Kagame, Rwanda, been in charge for 30 years. Why didn't you criticize him? Because all those people that I've just mentioned, right, are European project managers, are lackeys for the West. And as long as they're doing what the West wants, right, they will not attack them. But as soon as somebody like Ibrahim Traore comes along and it is doing what the West does not want them to do, then they become public enemy number one. And we're saying enough is enough. And so, in closing, Ibrahim Traore has our support as conscious, right-minded thinking Africans, and it would be a big mistake if you murder Captain Ibrahim Traore, because Captain Ibrahim Traore is now, you could say, the poster boy of Africa, and a lot of the African youth are watching what is going on and seeing the tremendous work that he's doing in Burkina Faso, giving back land to the people, giving back wealth to people, creating employment for the people, and bringing. I saw a video the other day whereby there's a massive red program going on in Burkina Faso. Yeah. So when the French left, there are hardly any roads in Burkina Faso, apart from Ouagadougou, the capital. But in the Ibrahim Traore, there is a rapid, road construction program that's ongoing and going on within the country. This is what leadership is about. Leadership is not about sending money to the white man, having Swiss bank account, having, driving around in expensive cars while people live on $2 a day. No, leadership is being selfless, like a Nkrumah, doing for the people, by the people, for the people. Yeah, giving back the wealth of the land to the people and not multinational companies, ensuring that everyone has the right to feed themselves, to clothe themselves, to provide shelter for themselves, and to be able to afford healthcare and education. This is what Ibrahim Traore is doing in Burkina Faso. So why should the West call him a dictator and want to get rid of him? That should tell you why that the white man does not want Africa to develop. And so we're going to keep an eye on this. And listeners, particularly those of you who are of African descent, keep an eye on events that are going on in Burkina Faso. Don't be swayed by the propaganda in the Western media, and support our brother Ibrahim Traore, because he's doing some fantastic work in the country that a lot of these African leaders are not doing. All right, so this has been Africa in Focus with myself, Kwame. Hope you've enjoyed this special edition of Africa in Focus. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to Ghana Africa in Focus on Spotify, subscribe to Ghana Africa in Focus on YouTube, and if you'd like to donate to the show to help us contribute, to help us make some more fantastic content coming from Ghana, from Africa, you can go into the website just look out for Ghana Africa in Focus website, and you can click the donate button, and you can donate as little as $3 a month. There's no obligation to keep it. You can do a one-off payment, or you can have a monthly subscription. All right, so from myself, Kwame, and from the crew here on Africa in Focus, is thank you very much for listening. And we'll see you next week for Ghana in Focus, where we'll tell you about how Ghana is not cheap and Ghana could be expensive depending on your taste. So look out for that in next week's edition of Ghana in Focus.